Hi, Danny.
So we're at the end of a long couple days together.
Yes.
You said you
Really
survived.
Yes.
So I hope I hope you still have some energy for this.
Yeah, I do. Absolutely.
We said I'll have some surprises for you.
Yes.
So first of all, welcome everyone. This is episode 42 of the Treatment Room Secrets podcast. And my first question is about the flute.
Ah, the flute.
The flute, which maybe some of us forgot about already. So we started our days together with you playing the flute.
Yeah.
What's the story there? Why the flutes, and how long have you been playing? Why the flute? How long have you been playing the flute?
Well, I mean, really, that's my background, actually, as a musician. I studied music at university and I went to music college part-time as well. So the flute I learned when I was 10 or 11, I think. And my parents used to take me to concerts around the London area. And they often used to take me to Bach, actually, which, to be honest with you, I've found quite boring. But anyway, one of the things I really liked was the sound of the flute. It kind of got me. And, I don't know, I just took to it very, very quickly. And then I got a scholarship to school. And then I got a scholarship to university to study. And then I got a scholarship later on to go and study abroad. So,
but it wasn't all around, was it all around the flute? Like so you were playing the flute the whole time?
Yes, I mean that was my main passion. I play a little bit of piano, but I'm not that great at piano. But
we're in the piano room.
I know. Yes, there's a piano there. And there's something that about it, that the kind of purity of it that really took me, and the kind of directness of, your experience is just you and the breath and your fingers, and there's something so magical. I mean, I still play today, and I really love playing with sort of professional players. There's something about that connection with the audience that is so extraordinary, that when you kind of get into a zone with it. I know we were talking about the vagus and how, it stimulates your vagus when you do these kind of long exhalations, and when you play any musical instrument, actually, particularly a wind instrument. But there's something about that connection which is not through any other medium. It's just through sound. And, when you're playing with a group of really professional people, there's a sort of, it's very difficult to describe. It's like a camaraderie that they kind of there to support you, and you're playing off each other and you're working on your intuition. I mean, I've always found it really strange how that works. When you look at an orchestra, or particularly someone, like a string quartet, a small group, and how when you start a piece, they all come in exactly at the same time. And it's sort of beyond your, the mind, really. There's something that you communicate with each other in a way that's beautiful, absolutely beautiful.
So it's more than just repetition practice?
Oh God, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, there's something. Yeah, I mean, it's, it's like with anything, I suppose. You've either kind of got it or you haven't. There's something that you have to feel it with your whole body. But obviously, it's such a skill, because you've got to coordinate what you're reading on the page. What's happening with your intonation, with your tuning, in respect to everyone. So it's like you're constantly monitoring, constantly adjusting. And I specialized actually at university in playing old instruments, 18th century instruments, which are quite primitive. That's basically a bit of wood with, holes in it, which is tapered, but it's, there's not much to it. And again, it's just you and the air going down the tube. Really.
But activating the vagus nerve, which is why we were using the flute as an example. It's the exhalation, not the sound, not the vibration, which activates the vagus nerve?
I think it's everything. I think it's the sound of music. No, that's a film, isn't it?
Yeah.
The sound of music. I think it's the vibration. I mean, particularly with the flute, it's quite a pure kind of sine wave, I think they call it. There's not much sort of jagged bits in it. It's pretty pure. And in fact, that's why the Greeks, I don't know if you knew this, in the old days, they actually banned women and girls from listening to the flute, because it would excite them too much. It was too sensual. So I quite like that. So
What is it about specific instruments then, or like why the flute versus because of that?
You mean why I like it, or
no, why were Greek women banned from listening to the flute?
Well, so that's allegedly, I don't know.
Yeah, but it's like is it a variety of instruments that maybe like create this feeling inside of us, or is it specific instruments that we know? Like for me, when I listen to, and I don't know anything about different composers out there, I'm very ignorant, but I'm. Accidentally I fell on a few of them, and the violin, right. Like, I feel like it breaks my heart into tiny pieces, and it gets me like emotional for no reason. So yes, what is it?
I don't know. We all respond to different kind of vibrations. Don't we? For me, also, a wonderful singer. I remember going to a concert in Tel Aviv, actually, with the Israel Philharmonic. And there was a singer then, I can't remember what her name was, but she was singing Bach. I mean, it was what you were describing. It was just like so moving, absolutely so beautiful. So there's something about purity, isn't there? There's something about purity in a voice or an instrument that we love. And the violin is also very pure. I mean, it's just a string, isn't it? Well, it's 4 strings.
Yeah.
And it's just someone, putting their fingers on the string to make that slightly shorter or longer. But the vibration of that is just a pure wave, really. That's what it is. And I guess with some instruments, it's more complicated. So like with reed instruments, when you got like the oboe, or the clarinet, where they've got actually a reed in it, which is vibrating fast. And that's what produces the sound, which is perhaps a little bit not quite so pure. I hate to say that, but it's probably true. Yeah.
And the vagus nerve. So, can we explain in brief? What is it? Why are we so excited about it? Why are we so dismissive of it? Some of us.
Right.
And so first of all, what is it? And then we'll take.
Well, the vagus nerve is really part of our autonomic nervous system, and the autonomic nervous system is there to really. It's around survival instincts, you could say. So it's happening kind of below our conscious awareness most of the time.
Like breathing is part of the autonomic nervous system?
Yeah, breathing, the heart rate, digestion, all that kind of stuff. So we need the vagus and we need our autonomic nervous system to survive in any kind of situation. And so the way it's evolved is very interesting. And that evolutionary process, you could say, is kind of still held in our bodies. So, Porges, who developed this whole theory, which is still a theory about what he called the polyvagal. So it's not just one part of the vagus, it's various parts of it. So the way he described it was that it, evolved in very primitive creatures to help us digest food initially. And we still have that part of our vagus still in us. We call it the old vagus. And that's associated with, pretty primitive kind of responses in us. Which are to do with food and shutdown and rest and repair and, all that kind of stuff, and what we call dissociation. And then in evolution, the more activated part, so we had to kind of, fight or flight, this kind of thing. We had to get away from danger, we had to fight for food and that kind of thing. So the sympathetic nervous system then came into play, which is, again, part of our autonomic nervous system. And then more recently, I mean, not so recently, a few 100,000 years ago, quite a long time ago, our what is called the social nervous system, or the new vagus, sounds like, came online. And that was all to do with communication. And in order for us to survive really in groups, we have had to do that. We can't survive individually. So that's kind of in a very brief, very nutshell, what it's about. And so it's around our aspects of survival in us. And it's interesting because it's happening on the unconscious level. So for many people, it might kind of run us and we don't really quite know why it runs us. So, we might get triggered by something, a conversation, or even an internal thought. It could be anything that kind of triggers our autonomic response into something perhaps that was at one time useful. So it might have been at one time it was useful when we had a car accident that we got out of the car quickly, or whatever it was, or when we were born, certain things happen. But, sometimes these things can get imprinted, particularly with very early experience, and they kind of then run us and they get triggered later on. perhaps not in a particularly helpful way, but we don't necessarily understand why, because it's happening at an unconscious level. So part of what we're doing, I suppose, is to bring things into more conscious awareness, really, in order for us to get a bit of distance from it. Because a lot of people can feel, and I think this happens particularly with early experience and early trauma, that there kind of gets this kind of interlink between how our nervous systems respond to an incident and what we believe about it.
About the incident.
Well, what we believe is about us, actually. And this happens very early. So I'll give you an example.
Yeah, let's play with a hypothetical example.
Yeah, I'll give you an example. So, for example, a baby or a young child might experience a traumatic incident, and they might believe that that's their fault. Yes, or that somehow they are bad because of it. So, or they're in the wrong place. So there's something like that they might consider that that something, that they've done something wrong.
Yeah.
So then later in life, what can happen when you get triggered by a similar kind of incident, that kind of gets triggered as well. Those kind of belief systems about our place in the world, if you like, and our place in terms of relationship to others, and whether we're kind of intrinsically good, those kind of sensations. So it's like they can get that, and those sort of things can run us. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So because a lot of people actually these days have this kind of intrinsic feeling that they're not good enough, or they're not worthy, or that somehow there's something wrong with them, or they're in the wrong place, or they shouldn't be here. You know what I mean? So very often those kind of feelings are linked in with an autonomic response, whether that's a freeze response. Like I remember, I used to go into those freeze responses a lot when I was younger, and I never knew why. I mean, as a child, I didn't know about these kind of things, where, maybe your mouth would dry up, you feel you can't say anything, or you'd also go into a kind of freeze response when you want to exit the room as well. You want to run away, but you also don't, it's like those kind of things. So, and then along with that, you kind of think, oh, I'm somehow wrong or something like that. So it's those things. I find that very interesting. So this understanding about the vagus can really help us separate that out. What is our autonomic response? What are our nervous system response? And what is our, what are we? Because we are not our nervous systems. You know what I mean? We are something else.
So we're not our nervous systems. So
No.
we are trying to.
No,
so what are we with the vagus nerves? We're trying not to activate it, but we're trying to understand what emotions it kind of brings in within us and separate from it.
Yeah, to get a bit of distance. I mean, you could also say that we're not our thoughts, and we're not our emotions. You could say that, couldn't you? We're something beyond that.
Yeah.
There's something. You could say that there's something. We're more of a. Our soul is embodied in this place, right?
Yeah.
In this body, but we are not the body necessarily, and we're not our nervous systems. We're not our thoughts, we're not our emotions, there's something beyond that. So it allows us to get, this understanding allows us to get a bit of difference and separation from what is our autonomic nervous system doing its own thing in terms of trying to survive in this world.
So if I'm faced with an incident on a regular day where I realize immediately it's invoking some reaction within me automatically.
Yeah.
Even someone says something that triggers me from inside.
Yeah.
But my head says, why, like talking to myself,
Right.
I'm saying, oh, I shouldn't be feeling these feelings right now.
Yeah.
Why did that trigger me?
Yeah.
But is that me in essence, like playing that game of trying to maybe separate myself from these automatic feelings or automatic reactions that I have?
Yeah. So that's an interesting thing you just said. So you said, I shouldn't be feeling these things. So we often have a judgment, don't we, about our reactions to things. Oh, I shouldn't, I should be able to handle this. I mean, mums get this a lot, and dads as well. I should be able to handle this situation at work, or, I should be able to handle my child. I shouldn't be feeling angry in that situation, but we do. So it's not really so much about what we should or shouldn't feel, because we're not really in control of that necessarily. It's more kind of understanding why. And when we say, oh, I kind of get it now. That's an old response. I don't have to go there, because otherwise we can kind of follow that, can't we? We can follow that response and get angry with someone and say, well, I'm right, and you're wrong. And blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
And then it doesn't go really anywhere. So, and part of the whole...
So let's try to make sense, not let's trying to, apply logic in the moment or judgment in the moment, but trying to understand the why.
Yeah, but it's also... a kind of somatic thing where we're so we're noticing those kind of reactions where we might go into an activated state, like a sympathetic state, angry, emotional, whatever it is, or we might go into more of a freeze state, and realizing actually in order to engage with this situation, whatever we need to resolve with somebody or whatever situation it is that we need to deal with, the best place to do that from, generally speaking, is more of what we call the new vagus, so the ventral vagus, where we're more in our social engagement system, which is a calm, it's a related, a relational state rather than a reactive state. Because those reactive states don't really go anywhere, do they? I mean, we see this playing out, unfortunately, all over the world in terms of what's happening in Israel and, with wars and what's happening in Ukraine and those places, they don't really get us anywhere. So I think it's wonderful to really have this understanding about actually the place to resolve things are from a place of relationship and a place of face-to-face interaction and kind of calmness where we're centered in the heart. And I think that's a lot of what Porges talks about, bringing ourselves back into that relational state, really.
So is the vagal response that I might feel, is it almost like a protective barrier that I have to try and maybe minimize in certain times in order to understand it? Because I'm trying to even for me practically, how would I approach that? I'm trying to avoid words such as like a sense or logic or judgment. So because I'm trying to understand. So how do I literally apply that in a way that will help me, stay calm for the next time?
Right.
Or is that also wrong thinking? Trying to think of success or improvement.
I don't think anything's wrong or right in this situation. It's just some things are helpful and not helpful, really, right? So, it's not particularly helpful. If you're having an argument with your partner or something, and you're both going into this kind of more angry state and it's going backwards and forwards. You said that, she said that. Then that's not generally going to go anywhere, is it?
Yeah.
Whereas if we slow things down, and we bring ourselves back to our hearts, and we do things, practical things. I mean, on the course I was talking about, using the breath and things like that, and getting a sense of embodiment, feeling into, sensation in the body, which generally brings us back to the present time. All those things, and actually, you can do that together with somebody. It doesn't have to be a kind of solitary thing. You say, let's just take a step back. Let's just take a bit of time out. Let's just take a few breaths. Let's just feel our feet on the ground, And immediately you do that, you can feel your people's nervous systems kind of settling back. And that's a much better place to try and sort things out from. Does that make sense?
It doesn't.
So it's not that, during the day, it's inevitable that we're going to go, when we're stressed and we've got to get things done, you're more in your sympathetic state. That's kind of normal because that has to happen. Or, if a car's coming at you, then you're going to go into like that sort of sympathetic state, and that's appropriate. And then sometimes it's more appropriate to go into a kind of a more old vagal state, like a more free state, for example. It's kind of normal for us. But I suppose that the issue more is like if we get stuck in one or the other. We want to be fluid in our lives, don't we? We want to be able to come in and out of those autonomic states. So that's kind of what he talks about. I just think it's very useful, really. Yeah.
I'll try and think about it more, and also see. No, because I'm just trying to really think about from my personal experiences. Yeah. So if I'm trying, so I notice reactions all the time. I do notice
in yourself.
Yeah, and even now sitting here, I notice, even if it's irrelevant little reactions, certain things, but I do feel reactions. Even to the coaster not being on the table.
Yeah.
Again, it was no big deal, but I did feel a reaction.
Sure.
And it's not necessarily where it should be, right? Like we said. So is it enough for me to acknowledge the reaction, because the reaction is in the past?
Yes.
So it is kind of fluid, because I did forget about it until a second ago. But so is that what you're talking about? So I noticed a reaction from myself. So to a degree, I notice some sort of relationship that I have with my nervous system.
Yeah.
Do I need to do? Can I do anything else?
Yeah, but Danny, you're very relational already. I mean, I don't think you suffer too much from going into your sympathetic state, like a lot of people
in my new well, Vegas,
as far as I know,
in my new Vegas.
I think you're pretty much
my old Vegas, which you said is the more ancient one, and the more free one. You use the word free for the old Vegas.
The old Vegas that's more to do with, as we said on the course, it's more to do with digestion beneath the diaphragm. It's more to do with those kind of freeze responses.
Oh, freeze.
Yeah, freeze responses. So it's like, if you were startled by the headlights and you can't move, and it's like, and you see this with animals a lot. Yeah. They quite often go into that freeze response, particularly when they can't get out of a situation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, but physically in the body, like, you were showing us examples of how you can, look at someone's vagal nerve. You did like the mouth test.
Oh, the uvula,
So what are you looking for there?
So in that test where you're looking at the back of someone's mouth, it's a strange kind of thing to do.
Yeah, it is.
Not the sort of thing you do at parties, really. But anyway.
Depends which party.
Depends which parties. So the vagus nerve, if you're familiar with anatomy, but it coordinates and works with other cranial nerves. Cranial nerves are the nerves that innervate the face and the jaw and the mouth and the throat and the heart, etc. And so the vagus nerve also connects with the back of the throat. And it's interesting that a lot of these cranial nerves we tend to activate and stimulate in social situations naturally. So like here we've got something to drink, we're talking, we're doing a lot of face-to-face interaction. If you were going out on a date or something, you would normally involve, food and eating and maybe music, or all those things, right, are working with all these different cranial nerves. If you look at it from that point of view. And what was the question?
I forgot the question specifically as well. No, but with I asked you specifically about the test. The test for what we're looking for in the back of the mouth.
Of course, yes. So that the part of the thing is the vagus is innervating the back of the mouth. So when you look at the back of the throat there, when someone opens their mouth and says, you can see what the uvula is lifting up. Yes, that's what it does. And so if there's some nerve entrapment to do with the vagus, then you'll get a sort of deviation on that. It's quite a simple little test.
So you will notice a deviation, which we struggle to find.
Which we didn't see on anybody.
So I think we tested like 4 or 5 people.
So it means you're in all good shape.
In good shape. So, but if mine was, if you did notice deviation within me, which you did, you said you did a little bit, right? But if it was more than a little bit, how would you respond to that? What should we be talking about? And
so I mean, in that case, as I said before, that the vagus can get affected by lots of different things. So one of those things could be nerve entrapment, which is kind of what we're talking about here, because it's like any nerve. It's a really, really long thing in the body, massively long. But it can also get affected by stress, by trauma, by, poor diet, all those kind of things. So if you look at nerve entrapment, then that, the fact that nerve is not working properly might be something to do with the neck. So we would do some therapeutic work around the neck or around the back of the head. And it's interesting, Stanley Rosenberg talks about this in his book. And in fact, we've had him doing a podcast for us a few years ago as well, where he kind of demonstrated this too, where you can do that little test and then do a little bit of work, say around the back of the head, which is around the brainstem here, or around the neck, and then you retest and it's changed. Right. So that's kind of something you're looking for.
So even today, like if you tested me and you saw that there was a larger deviation that I had, we could do some work and we should be able to see results pretty immediately.
Yeah, quite quickly.
Amazing. And what type of work is it? Is it cranial?
So, I mean, you can do, obviously I know that your courses are designed for kind of any kind of therapist, aren't they? Whatever they're doing. So, you could approach the neck work with, massage, you can approach it with fascial work, you can approach it.
But so even something like that would have an effect on
absolutely 100%. Yeah.
Yeah, very interesting. And could there be like, things like chronic pain, any areas of the body that maybe are not a result of some injury, or maybe even with the result of some injury, like you said, certain things are coded or maybe stored on the vagal nerve from past trauma. Physical pain or a physical blow, can that also have an effect on the vagal nerve?
Yeah, so physical injuries to the back of the head and any kind of trauma, could affect the whole autonomic nervous system. I mean, when you were talking about the vagus, it's not really just the vagus. It can affect the whole, the autonomic nervous system is not just the vagus. That's the parasympathetic part of it. Really, the other parts are the sympathetic pain part, which is more the kind of activation and fight or flight response. So in chronic pain, usually what we're talking about is quite a high level of activation in the sympathetic system. In other words, the body is feeling that something's not right. So it's going into this state of alarm and not panic, but it's like activated. It's like saying, something's not right here.
Yeah. Is that anxiety though? Is that a feeling of anxiety that we get?
It can also stimulate the sympathetic nervous system and actually then create symptoms of anxiety. So it's not uncommon. I mean, one of the things, if you take something like fibromyalgia, I don't know if you're familiar with that, but that's a kind of chronic pain condition which is very common, and like a lot of chronic pain, it might start with something specific, like a knee injury or ankle injury, whatever it doesn't matter, or after an operation, and then after a while, you're talking about over a few months possibly, it begins to kind of spread. And that's one of the characteristics of fibromyalgia, that it kind of spreads. And, one day you might feel it in your knee, and the next day you might feel it in your shoulder. And, they say the people who work with chronic pain and research it, people like David Butler and Laura Mosley, who are fantastic in this, understanding it, it kind of becomes meaningless. And it's not this kind of very simplistic model that we tend to think of, that there's something, wrong with your knee and your knee's firing off all these neurotransmitters and it's saying, it's something wrong. It's not that. It's not just a nerve pathway. It's our interpretation of it. You know what I mean? Of that. And we try and interpret it, and our mind is trying to interpret it, but it kind of gets it wrong, if you like. And part of that whole thing is that our sympathetic nervous system gets quite active with it. So we can, along with that chronic pain, we can get feelings of a lack of ability to settle. I mean, it's not a very pleasant experience, that really. It's like, I can't find my center. It's very difficult for me to sleep, or I've got a very active mind. Those kind of symptoms are very common with fibromyalgia. In fact, one of the criteria for fibromyalgia is that, you probably don't sleep very well, and maybe you're depressed, and you have pain in these certain parts of your body. So that kind of goes along with this kind of understanding of how this works. So therapeutically, when we work more with the new vagus and we begin to bring people out of that kind of activated state, which we can do really well with clever hands-on work. I mean, that's the best way, it's kind of somatic work, to bring people back out of that hyper aroused state, is what we call it, into a calmer state. Then immediately their nervous systems begin to settle, and literally they will feel better, less pain, and they will sleep better. They'll have more energy. I mean, the other thing that happens, this is through the study of fascia, is that in chronic pain, you get a buildup of these sympathetic nerve terminals, which are triggered by external stimuli. So what happens in that situation in chronic pain is it kind of tends to get worse and worse and worse, because any kind of stressor, like an argument or going out in the cold in the UK, anything like that will tend to trigger that as an alarm, and the body goes into a kind of a state of stress, and then people feel more pain. So we can work with that in a fantastic way. And when we begin to understand how the kind of vagus and the autonomic nervous system works, we can do it in a very clever way. So we can calm the sympathetic nervous system down, or if they're more in a shut down kind of state, a dissociated state where they can't really feel anything, we can begin to bring them out of that. So which can be a little bit of a long process, but if we stick with it, we can certainly do that. Yeah.
Besides that, the mouth test, is there anything, any other tests that you would do to look at someone's, to maybe spot any like deviation?
Yeah, I think with that kind of test, you're looking at something a bit mechanical. I think you're looking at something which is to do with, probably nerve entrapment or some instability in the neck or something like that. But I think there's much more to it than that. So, what a lot of psychotherapists now are doing and body workers are doing with this polyvagal work is to use cues to, you can tell when you meet someone pretty much kind of where they are in their kind of vagal tone, you could say, yes. Mm-hmm. And you can tell that from the way they talk, the way they breathe. You can tell it from their eyes. So, if someone's in a sympathetic state, activated state, their pupils are going to be probably quite big. Yep. They're going to generally talk quite fast and agitated, and you probably use a lot of hand gesture, and they may be quite emotional, maybe angry, maybe fidget a lot, those kind of things we're looking for. And then more when people perhaps are more in a shutdown state, they have this tendency not to be very present. So when you look at them, you can see their eyes are slightly glazed over. When you ask them how they feel, it's much more difficult for them to feel into sensation. They will generally have poor muscle tone, probably low energy, might be quite sort of depressed, probably don't want to be very social, that kind of state. People don't want to relate, so they probably won't want to go out much and meet other people. That will be too much for them.
And is it normal, suggested, healthy for us to maybe like to move, back and forth on that spectrum?
Yeah, I think it's absolutely normal.
But if you're like stuck in one side of it, then one should do some self-investigating, or one should maybe see someone, or at the least maybe do some breathing exercises, try and ground themselves, try and feel within. Because recently, a few months ago, I underwent a somatic therapy session, somatic language therapy session, where I get through certain cues, using words and language and communication with the therapist that I was with. I was sitting there and I was laying. It was like two different variations we did, and it was just her asking me questions and maybe saying certain words, and me answering the questions, or her trying to ask me what it is that I'm listening to, what is it I'm feeling, what is my body communicating to me? And at the least, I finished that. I think it was like about 45 minutes to 1 hour. I was like a new person.
Really?
Yeah, because I don't think I've ever spent that long communicating with myself from within. No, I have spent way longer communicating with my brain, right. Going through your thoughts, going through what you should do, what you shouldn't do, the plan, all these different things, what happened yesterday, but never like, what is my body, what is my body telling me? And when nothing was going necessarily wrong at that moment, like, there were no obvious cues before the session that, led me to sit down and try. I wasn't digging for anything. But a lot came out when I started digging. I wasn't expecting it to, but it's, so that was for the first time, simply by slowing down, disassociating myself from my phone, different things out there, and allowing myself to be guided by the therapist and be guided by the certain cues. And it definitely slowed me down in a good way.
Absolutely.
Temporarily. That's the problem, no? Because like these things, because I have learned certain lessons from those 45 minutes that I can and or could have until this moment applied some of them to myself. But why do you think it's so hard to? And we spoke about this before, which I'll bring up. But why do you think it's so hard? Like this, like, for me, I think it's easier to go on and again, not because I'm fit. Going for a run for 20 minutes is difficult, and I hate it.
Right.
But I'd rather do that than listen to my body for 20 minutes.
That's very interesting, isn't it?
But I think most people I know are like that. No one had, even Louise was saying how, sorry to throw you under the bus, but like how she doesn't think she's good at, let's say, meditating or avoiding thoughts.
Yeah.
So I don't think anyone's good, or most people are not good at it, good in air quotes, when they sit down and try and attempt something like that.
Yeah.
And I think it becomes very frustrating very quickly, A. B, if you go for a 20-minute run every day, you will see the results physically. But if I listen to my body for 20 minutes every day, I'm assuming and hoping that I would feel the results, but no one to share it with, no one to compliment me on the results, because no one can see it. And I won't even be sure that, because it's like it's a new reference point, new type of scoring ranking of success. This type of thing, right? It's not what we used to. It's not getting faster at running. It's not getting fitter, and it's not having less muscle ache. Is what it is.
Yeah, it's a kind of exploration, isn't it?
Exploration,
it's a journey of exploration, which I find very interesting. And it's so interesting how our body holds all these patterns. I mean, I go to a therapist regularly, and we work in that kind of somatic way with sensation, and a lot of stuff that we explore goes back to really, really early experience. What we feel around here, around our umbilical area. I mean, a lot of people feel that, don't they? They don't really know what it is, and they don't necessarily... Butterflies, those kind of things. Or you go through a breakup and you feel like you've been stabbed. So those can be very intense sensations, but we often try and kind of ignore those things, don't we? Because maybe they're not very comfortable. And I think for some people, those experiences, particularly early experience, can be, quite traumatic and quite overwhelming. So, if someone suffered, say, neglect or abuse, kind of the last thing they want to do is feel their bodies. You know what I mean? There's a lot of resistance to it because it's not sometimes very pleasant. So, but I think one of the things that you were describing, and you're talking about like how we might, force ourselves to sit down and listen. It's not for everybody. For some people, things like meditation or even mindfulness can actually make them more activated, and that's not great. But I think it's very helpful to work with someone in this, because Porges talks a lot about the need for safety. That's one of the key things with bringing us back into a more social engagement. If we don't feel safe, we can't do it. And as we said on the course, some people just don't feel safe in their bodies, full stop, or in any environment. Some people don't feel safe in this world. So
we're at different starting points as well when we sit down and listen to our body. Yeah.
Everybody's, some people are, quite happy, aren't they, in their bodies, and and other people are like, oh, this world is like a fearful place. And I think that unfortunately is happening more and more. I know there was some sort of questionnaires sent out to kids in the UK recently about how they felt about their place in the world. And many of them were reporting about the fact that this world is not a safe place to be. They didn't see it as a safe place to be because of concerns about in the environment, and also around war. So that's a very sad statement, because, in the past, we've always used connection as a way to heal, and particularly connecting with the world and the earth, through going in for walks in nature, and also connecting with our bodies. Traditionally, if you look how people have healed, they've always coming back to the body, and back into connection with each other as well as a way of healing, and back into connection with spirit. And you can say really all those things have been kind of in a way fractured, not completely damaged, but kind of fractured. So our relationship now with the world is kind of one of slight ambivalence for a lot of people, because there's a feeling somehow that we have damaged this world, and then that was also came in with COVID, where we felt, I'm a danger to others, and is my body capable of fighting off, this infection?
And also, for the first time, like, you mentioned like Ukraine wars.
Yeah.
Like now, it's the first time ever we can pull up social media on my phone now, and we could see the war in Ukraine live.
Yes, right in your face.
Yeah, right in your face. Endless content.
Yeah. So there's something about, with this work, I think it's really useful, because it's around social engagement, to do this work in groups or with another individual, because that can help create this sense of safety and help bring us back into relationship, which is kind of what it's all about, really. So
just adding that element of safety will invoke maybe more secure feelings and just allow you to...
It's not just that, it's essential. It's like, this is the way that our nervous systems work. We need to feel safe.
But also safe doesn't have to be, like, safe is not black or white, right?
No.
Because it also can be like a different gray area, and safe for me is not
absolutely
safe for you.
Absolutely. No, it'll be completely different for you than it is for me. And different triggers will trigger different people. That's why we have to be careful, what we have in our therapy rooms. And I used to play music in my therapy room because I liked it. And it was usually old kind of church music, which I thought, that's very relaxing. And then I remember having a woman came in and lay down, and she heard this music and she like freaked out because she'd had this horrible experience, at school, in a religious school. So, it's different for everybody. Yeah.
Cranial Sacral Therapy.
Yes.
What would you say if we now, in the next couple minutes, we want to debunk the woo-woo dismissiveness feeling around cranial sacral therapy?
Yeah.
What would you say?
Well, I mean,
I'll preface that by adding that, I like you, and I like how you talk about the things you practice, because we've been speaking for a while and we saw each other a few times, and I don't feel like you're trying to sell me on craniosacral therapy, which I love, because if you were, then I maybe wouldn't have asked you the question I just asked. So for the listeners to know that you're not someone that's walking around trying to convince people to touch people's heads.
No.
So what would you say though?
To convince someone?
Not necessarily to convince, but like to confirm for me. Right. That it's not woo-woo. Like something I brought up to you is like, and that you mentioned obviously in the course, is like the movement.
Yeah.
In the bones in the skull.
Yes.
Which helped me kind of disassociate a bit more away from woo-woo stuff.
Right.
Because it just makes it more real.
Yeah.
Like, forget the fact that we can't see. Yes, you can learn to feel the different movement patterns, but we can't see it. So maybe it just, it's more difficult for someone. It's way easier when you can, maybe like a trigger point, or maybe something more visual, or more obvious, something more obvious to debunk as not woo-woo. And even they have their own, problems and issues. But specifically with craniosacral therapy, because it's something that I experienced myself, and even this was about 10 years ago, even after I experienced that, even with success, I didn't understand or didn't ask any questions from the person that was administering it on me. But I knew that it helped me to some degree. But I didn't know if someone asked me if it was woo-woo or not. I wouldn't have anything to say to debunk it, or to try and convince them, or to try and confirm my feelings.
So what you're asking really is, how does it work, right? How do you explain to someone how it works? Because when we understand that, and that's actually it's very difficult. See, I think this is true with a lot of therapies, and I think a lot of therapists fall into this trap of they observe something in their clients, And then they try and explain, and they might feel something through their hands in a therapeutic process, and then they'll try and put that into some context. They'll try and explain it in terms of known physiology and anatomy, and sometimes that model doesn't quite fit, And I think that was probably true with craniosacral therapy to a certain extent. So, for example, some of the early cranial osteopaths saw that movement of all the bones of the cranium a bit like cogs in the gears of a car, because at that time when they were developing the work, the car was just coming into the thing, and
it made
gearboxes. So that kind of made sense, but because that's kind of what they were feeling, so they said, oh well, the bones must be moving like this, right? The actual reality is it's probably not quite as simple as that. And also, the way I suppose we could explain it in, with any kind of thing that you do a lot. So I've been doing this for 30 years now. And I can put my hand on someone's back or their feet, and I can kind of sense quite quickly where the patterns are, what their nervous systems are doing, and all that kind of stuff. And if I was to put that into words, it would be very, very difficult. But I can feel a fascial pull here. I can feel this activation in their nervous system. I can feel they've had a fall here. And if someone asks me, well, how? Well, you could say, well, it might be a bit like, I don't know, a really experienced plumber or someone like that, who's able to put their hand on a wall and say, oh yeah, I can feel a pipe there, and the water's going that way. You know what I mean?
Yep.
Whereas a normal person wouldn't be able to do that kind of thing. So I think a lot of it is practice, and the more we do it, the more sensitive we get at it. And in terms of the mechanism of how it works, so you can talk about the fact that cerebral spinal fluid is moving in the body, that has been measured, it has been observed, and that seems to have this movement of the cranial bones, and not just that, but the whole body expresses this kind of breathing patterns, this what we call primary respiration, sort of what we call inhalation, exhalation patterns, which are very, very slow. And, most people can feel that, most therapists can feel that pattern, and they pay attention to it, and maybe they've never felt it before because they never tried to listen to it before. But I'm sure that you, for example, if you did it for a few weeks, you'd definitely be able to feel something like that.
If I worked on someone for a few weeks?
Yeah, well, actually not even work. You just put your hand on them. You probably would notice things coming through your hand. It's like a lot of this is just paying attention, isn't it? When we pay attention to something, we notice stuff. Whereas if we don't pay attention, we don't notice it. So I'm paying attention, a lot of hours a day, and I have been for 30 years. So it's
so when for a body worker out there, when is it an appropriate time to maybe think about using craniosacral therapy, or is it something that's not maybe triggered by a certain condition or pathology or something you notice, but just something that if someone, if you felt like it's worth checking someone, is the term mapping as well? No,
mapping. Yeah. I mean, really, because I teach this to a lot of different therapists. I do courses for Bowen therapists and who are not familiar with the craniosacral work at all. And for most of them, what the kind of aha moment is for them with it is not really so much applying a technique or particular holds of craniosacral therapy. It's actually much more that when they pay attention, what they can feel and the depth of what they can feel and the subtlety of what they can feel. So, and that's kind of a revelation, really. So, you might use all kinds of assessment with a client. You might do postural assessment and movement assessment and you get them on the table, and then you put your hands on, and that can validate perhaps what you're seeing with them standing. And as I said, you can get very, very sensitive to it. So you can feel, oh, actually that part of the hamstring there, where is it pulling to? It's pulling back into the back of their leg there, behind their knee. Let's see what's going on there. So it's an exploration, really.
So it can help the therapist. Yeah, so it can help the therapist though, another tool to understand what's
skills
to understand what's going on in the body.
Yeah.
And have you felt like maybe at certain times, or maybe even when you were new into craniosacral work, where maybe you were stuck with the patient, or
Yes.
couldn't find a way through, and then by using Craniosacral and being patient that way, it was able to almost guide you.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of guidance that comes through. I mean, it's strange how you can feel things. I can't really describe it necessarily why you can feel stuff, because one's hands are so sensitive. I know that there was a research recently looking at the difference between, like infrared cameras and things like this. I don't know if you've seen them, where you can take pictures of people's heat maps on their bodies, which are very, very sensitive things. But it was actually found that someone's hand is even more sensitive than that to sort of the heat maps of the body. So it's very interesting. So there's so much sensitivity in our hands that we can feel. So
yeah, it's crazy. It really is. In a good way. But it is. It's fascinating.
Yeah.
And then you mentioned there's different schools of thought, right, when it comes to teaching craniosacral work. So what's the differences there? Is it the two main bodies, or does it split a million different ways?
Well, I think firstly what I would like to say is there's more overlap than split. So it's like there's more overlap with what people are doing. So it's
like religions.
Hopefully, yes. That's not necessarily true in all cases. Hopefully, yes. You get cranial osteopaths. Now, cranial osteopaths are osteopaths who have trained in cranial work, in cranial osteopathy. And within cranial osteopaths, you might get some who are working more as what they would call themselves craniosacral therapists. And I suppose perhaps the main difference of approach now would be people who are trained under the Upledger Institute, John Upledger's work, which is very, very interesting. It has a slightly different model, and they bring in slightly different aspects into the work. Things like somato-emotional release work and other stuff, which they bring in, which is a little bit different to how we work. But again, there's more overlap than difference. And what you'll find with any practitioner, they'll do their basic training wherever that is, and then they'll go on to train in all kinds of other different approaches. So you might get an Upledger trained person who's done, a course in biodynamic work and biomechanical work, and they're kind of, we all fuse everything together in our own very individual approach. So, although there are different schools, there is some difference between them, but everyone will bring their own nuance to it, I would say.
What for the therapist? You've taught many people now.
Yeah.
What do you think is like maybe the biggest barrier to entry? Have you seen people? Because again, I've seen this with my own eyes.
Yeah.
Certain therapists going down the route of trying to learn this and sticking with it, and guys that have started and realizing very quickly that it's not for them and ditch it immediately.
Yeah.
So I'm assuming you've seen a lot of both. What do you think is the biggest barrier to entry? Because one of the things that you recommended is for the therapist to actually do some sort of like breathwork meditation before starting to pay attention and plugging into someone. Which to me seems like a barrier of entry, because it seems to me like I told you what I feel about how difficult it is to sit down and ground yourself and listen, disconnect for a second from everything that's around us all the time. I can see that as being a huge barrier to entry, because it requires immense discipline and not just going through the motions of breathing and grounding, but to actually try and get to that state in order for you to be able to try and connect.
So I suppose, it's horses for courses, really. Like some people like a more, mechanical approach to therapies, don't they? They like to see, that muscle is doing this, we need to work on that, and, look at it from that point of view. And I would say that craniosacral work is more fluid, it's more intuitive, perhaps, and that doesn't suit everybody at all. You're right. You do have to create a kind of reference point in yourself with this work. And the main thing with that is a sense of safety, that you as a therapist are able to contain whatever comes up in that therapy session. But I firmly believe actually that's true of any therapy situation, whether that's a psychotherapist or someone working very biomechanically. And I don't think we pay enough attention to that. That's kind of key, really.
And I love that you included that.
Yeah,
no, I think it's important. Yeah. Because also as the patient, you kind of, as the patient when the person touching you, looking at you, assessing you, examining you, whether they're with you or not.
Yeah, exactly. Or you might find someone, a bit creepy and you don't want them touching you.
And you know immediately, right?
Yes, you do. So it's not like you have to go on this, necessarily a journey of self-discovery. I mean, it's not like, I think a lot when people go to therapists, they think, oh, I'm going to a therapist, he must have sorted all his problems out. But actually, therapists probably went into this because they got issues, and they're still trying to sort them out. So for me, it's an exploration. It's like when you look at what you were talking about, this going into the body and maybe feeling sensations and just seeing where that leads. For me, it's just, again, if we can get a bit of distance from it, it becomes a very interesting journey. Even if it's difficult, it becomes fascinating. Why is my body responding like this? Why do I feel this? And I just think I think it's one of the most interesting journeys we can have.
Agreed. And why not try and have it?
Yeah. We can avoid it. We could do all kinds of things to keep it,
which is the easy part. Yeah, which we all do. To finish off the podcast, I told you I'd challenge you with a question. We have a new tradition.
Right.
So, Kat, also for you to get ready. What is one thing that comes to mind where you've changed your mind on completely? Whether it was a month ago or 15 years ago, that you were pretty certain that it goes one way, but you've clearly learned that you were wrong.
Okay. Well, I mean, you said 15 years ago. It was about 15 years ago, I suppose, or maybe a bit more than that, 20 years ago, when I first started training in craniosacral work. There began around that time to be a lot of interest in the impact of birth. Around how that impacted our lives, our physical and emotional state. And I always thought that was way too emphasized. I thought, that we can't remember that stuff. That doesn't impact us at all. And then slowly, kind of by things being shown in the face, as it were, I begin to realize actually, this kind of early experience really impacts us. So I began to explore initially birth. So I thought, well, that's a big event. It's a very impactful thing. And I began to see how that kind of played out with me. And then I began to realize actually it goes way back further than that. It goes back more to, pregnancy, what happens to us as we're forming in the womb,
So really early days.
Really, really early days. And maybe even before that, if you're a spiritual person, maybe you believe where have we come from, and why did we decide to be here in the first place?
So it's been going further and further back the last 20 years.
It might go back. Who knows? I don't know. So it's an interesting exploration, and we don't necessarily have all the answers to it. And I think that's the other thing is, it's not always helpful to kind of pinpoint things, and it's also never one thing. You know what I mean?
Yep.
It's usually a series of events, whether that's physical events or emotional trauma, whatever it is, that has impacted one upon another, on our lives. And a thought came to me the other day that I thought the one thing to remember is it's never one thing that's impacted us. So that's kind of my revelation for the day.
Pretty good. John Wilks, thank you very much. Pleasure spending time with you again.
Thanks,
pleasure hosting you again on the podcast. Hopefully it's not your last appearance.
Thank you.
And we will now have Bowen courses, cranial sacral courses, and about the vagus nerve.
The vagus, and also working with babies, right?
And working with babies. So fascinating stuff. I will continue my journey of self-exploration.
Good.
I will try and be as disciplined with my self-exploration in a slow state or in a meditative state. I'll work on it, and I'll give you an update the next time I see you. But thank you very much. That was awesome. And that wraps up the episode.
Good. Yeah, I think the main thing is it needs to be fun, doesn't it? Whatever we do needs to be interesting, needs to be fun and enjoyable. So.
Because that activates the nervous system. The vagus nerve, right? You said curiosity, fun, play.
Curiosity doesn't just kill the cat, it activates the nervous system.